Quickly, what is CARE? CARE's mission is to protect civil rights, to enhance the understanding of Islam and Muslims. CARE's mission is to enhance the understanding of Islam and Muslims, to protect civil rights, and to empower the American Muslim community. Now, what does that mean, empower? I think what we're doing tonight is empowering. It is empowering to know that you have rights. Some people will say, well, whenever you're doing these workshops, you're playing the victim card. You're making all Muslims sound like we're just waiting to be hit. That's not true. What I'm telling everyone tonight is, if you have an interaction with law enforcement, I hope that it's friendly, but should it go any further, you should know your rights and you should act on your rights accordingly. So we're here to enhance that, inshallah. John's not going to talk to me after this weekend, I'm sure. So what we'll cover today, I already kind of talked about this, but your rights and responsibilities during traffic stops, courtroom visits, FBI visits, which are especially fun, and airport travel. So can anyone here tell me, what are civil rights? I think I've said the word about 15 times tonight. Can anyone tell me what that means to you? No one answers. I'm just going to call on Chief Bashir. Anyone? Can anyone tell me where we get our civil rights from? I'll open it up to the sisters. From federal constitution? Okay, that's one. Jazakumullah khair. Sisters, any answers from y'all? Okay. There are rights. There are rights as Americans. Now, what's interesting about our rights as Americans is that as long as you're on American soil, and there's a little bit of an asterisk there, as long as you're on American soil legally, meaning you have a visa, you're on a green card, or you're a U.S. citizen, then you have these rights, and these rights pertain to you. So the rights we're going to be talking tonight are the right to the First Amendment, which is, everybody knows this one: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom to assembly. We're going to be talking about the Fifth Amendment, which is, John? Okay. The right to that's Sixth Amendment. The right not to self-incrimination, right? So you have the right to remain silent. All those cop shows that we see when they're being arrested on NCIS or CSI Miami, and they're like, you have the right to remain silent. That's where that one comes from. The Sixth Amendment, you have the right to an attorney. We're going to talk about that tonight. And that's about all the rights we're going to talk about tonight that pertain to this. So your civil rights come from the Constitution, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and other congressional acts, as well as some state laws. So before we jump into traffic stops, I'm going to introduce my friend. He's my friend. I don't think I'm his friend, but he's my friend. He's also a white guy, which is kind of convenient because people get us mixed up every time, even though we look nothing alike. We're not related in any way. But Mr. John Floyd. John is a board-certified criminal defense attorney who has been accepted Islam in 1994, say mashallah, and has been active within CARE, working on the criminal defense rights of the Muslim community since 2001, right? 2001. So just over 20 years, mashallah, and he has done that completely voluntarily. He has given so much of his time to making sure that people are familiar with their rights, and about 5 years ago, he had the great misfortune of being nominated to the CARE Houston board, where he was later elected president and board chair. And just this past January, he was snatched away from me right at the time I needed him the most, and he was nominated to the CARE National Board. So he now serves on the umbrella organization of all CARE chapters nationwide. Alhamdulillah. John has famously represented countless defendants, but most recently sued the state of Texas on behalf of Bahia Maui when she was denied her right to practice boycott, divestment, and sanctions of the Israeli government as a state contractor. John was on the legal team representing her, alhamdulillah. So John is going to come up here, inshallah, and talk about your rights pertaining to traffic stops, FBI visits, etc. So please welcome John Floyd.
Assalamu alaikum. Everyone can hear me? So thank you for that, Billy. As Billy said, I accepted Islam in 1994, and it was interesting when I first joined the community. No one really knew what Muslims were. No one knew where Muslims came from. After 9/11, of course, that all changed. And I'm married to a Pakistani woman. No one knew where Pakistan was at that point, except for people who were from Pakistan. All of a sudden, everyone knew where Pakistan was. And things changed in this country. We have 5 children together. I remember when, many years later, when President Trump was elected, my youngest son, who was in elementary school, the day after the election, I was walking him to school, holding his hand, and he looked up at me and he said, "Dad, is Mom going to be deported? She's a U.S. citizen, but it's just fear that has been promulgated against the Muslim community that does fundamental damage to our community, to even our children are fearful of being Muslims in what I believe is probably the best country to be a Muslim in. Right? We're free in this country to practice how we wish, without a government telling us, how we should practice and how we shouldn't. So if you take away anything tonight from our presentation or our speech, because it looks like we're not going to have much of a presentation, is that I encourage all of you to, number one, be proud to be Muslims in this country, and to not be shy about your constitutional rights. These rights were drawn up by the founders of this country for a very important reason. The people who came to this country in the 1700s to develop this country and wrote the Constitution did it because they were fleeing oppression, right? In a lot of times, most of the cases, they were fleeing religious persecution. And so these rights that were set out in the Constitution, alhamdulillah, they're for us. And we should be proud to exercise these constitutional rights. Every other community in this country is proud of those rights, is not shy to exercise those rights. They understand that the Constitution protects them. And that's why you hear other people always saying, hey, if law enforcement comes to the door, what's the first thing that someone like Martha Stewart, who got in trouble, right? First thing she does is she says, hey, I want to have my lawyer present. I'm not going to answer any questions without an attorney. She knows her rights. I've had many cases that involved churches, and these big pastors of these huge mega churches. You think they're shy of their constitutional rights? No, they're not. They'll graciously say, I'm glad to cooperate with you, but I'm not going to talk to you without my lawyer. And if you want any of our papers or any of our books, or you want a list of the people that worship here, you're going to have to go through the process and get a subpoena and get a judge and do this properly. So my point is that we should not be shy to do the same thing. Far too often, and I appreciate that a lot of my Muslim brothers and sisters in this country come from countries where they don't have these rights, and they want to fit in. A lot of times they want to feel like if I don't cooperate with law enforcement, or I don't answer their questions, or if I say I want a lawyer, that they'll think I'm hiding something, right? So just when you walk away from this, I hope you will remember these few lines. If you're ever contacted by law enforcement And I especially use this if you were contacted by FBI. We've literally done over 300 cases at our care office where FBI has come out to do nothing other than profile Muslims. It's mostly brothers. There have been some sisters that are getting this nice attention as well. But when they come to the door, they're not coming because you've done anything wrong. They're not coming because they're investigating a crime. There is a voluntary interview program that's been in existence in the United States by the Department of Justice ever since 9/11 that allows the FBI to do intelligence gathering. They don't do it to any other community. And if they do, you should understand you have these rights. Don't be afraid. Be proud of your rights. Okay? So what to do during a traffic stop? We're going to start with traffic stops. And where's the next slide? This one. Okay. So we're going to start off. We're going to go through what to do when contacted by, or when pulled over by police, when approached by local police, and then we're going to talk about the FBI. The first thing to know is if you are stopped in a traffic situation, it is very important that you understand that law enforcement has a job to do. We are not encouraging anyone to resist police or the police are bad. Police that work for us, they're our servants, right? They keep our community safe. If you're pulled over for a traffic violation, it's very important for you to understand that you need to listen. You need to pull over immediately when the lights come on. We've had, just in the last couple of months, we've had 4 cases come into the office where newly arrived immigrants have come in from Muslim countries, and they didn't realize when a cop lit them up from behind that they were supposed to pull over. A lot of times they slow down, they pull over into the right-hand lane, thinking that the police officer is going to go around, because in some countries that's what they do, right? They pull in front of you. That causes all kinds of problems. So everyone needs to understand that in this country, if the lights come on, then you need to make immediate plans to pull over into a safe space. Because if you don't, they may think you're fleeing or you're evading arrest. So that's very important. Once you do pull over, you should listen to the officer's instructions, because they have a protocol that they will follow. They'll ask you for your driver's license, your insurance, if they're asking for it. And if they ask for it, they have every right to do that. It's a privilege in the United States to drive on the roads. That's what the Supreme Court has said. And so if they ask you for these documents, you need to give them to them voluntarily. And that really should be the end of it. If that's all it is, if this is just a traffic violation, and they should write you a ticket. It's important that you understand you need to sign the ticket. Okay, by signing the ticket, you are not saying you're guilty. Okay, you're not admitting you've done anything wrong. You're just making a promise to appear in court later on. If you don't sign this ticket, you could be arrested. We see that happening quite often too, where people are saying, well, I'm not signing anything because I haven't done anything wrong. So understand that you need to sign the ticket. It's a promise to appear, and that really should end the interaction with the police officer. If for some reason they detain you for other issues, they have to have certain reasons to stop you or to detain you past the traffic violation. There has to be reasonable suspicion that some kind of crime has been committed. After that, they have to develop probable cause to make an arrest. Normally, that's not going to happen. Okay, but just be polite, sign your ticket, and that will be the end of that interaction. If you are placed under arrest by a police officer, it is very important that you understand that you cannot and should not resist in any way. Once law enforcement tells you you are under arrest, it is your obligation under the law to comply. And that means that they can place you under arrest and you cannot resist. Resisting means any kind of force in opposition to the attempt to do the arrest. So if you as much as jerk your hand away that's considered resisting arrest. And you can actually then be arrested for resisting arrest in addition to the other things. Okay, so it's very important that if you are placed under arrest, that you comply, that you're polite. If you don't agree with what they're doing, that's fine. That's when the lawyers come in and we can fight that later on in court. But once they tell you you're under arrest, you need to comply. Okay? If you feel like the officer's being rude or is disrespecting you, especially if they're disrespecting you for some constitutionally protected reason, if they're discriminating against you because of your country of origin or your religious beliefs, or if they're talking about the sisters and the hijab, make sure you document that. You get the police officer's identification, you can get their name, and make sure you save all that information so you can then later give it to an attorney, and then we can do something about that if it is a problem. Okay? What's this one? Since we have seen a uptick in incidents across the country about officers using what amounts to what they may believe is reasonable force, and a lot of times turns out to be a mistake, make sure that when you're having interactions with law enforcement that you're acting in a polite way, that you're keeping your hands in a place where they can see them, that you're following instructions, that you're not fumbling around, jumping in, grabbing things out of your coat, your cell phone, or your driver's license. Just remain calm, follow their instructions, and that's the best way to get through it. It's better for the officer, and it's better for you. That's okay. Obviously, if you are stopped by a police officer, you should not resist. Follow their instructions. You don't need to remove your safety belt or do anything like that. Getting prepared, just wait for officers' instructions and they'll tell you what you need to know. Go to the next one. These are bogus. Bottom line is, do not resist arrest. If you are placed under arrest, if you're told that you're under arrest by law enforcement, do not resist. Follow the officer's instructions. Under no circumstances should you run, even if you think you've done nothing wrong. Especially for our younger brothers, we see this a lot. They're scared. They think that they can get away. It is against the law to run from the police, and for good reason, because things escalate at that point. So for your safety and for officers' safety, do not resist arrest and do not run, okay? So this is the part of the presentation that I have the most experience with. We talked about earlier the FBI's voluntary interview program. They change the name periodically. They've even called this program community outreach at times. But it really is just an intelligence gathering program. For those of you who don't remember, after 9/11, there was a directive from the Department of Justice that every Muslim male in this country between the ages of 18 and 26, from what they considered suspicious countries, Muslim countries, there should be attempts by law enforcement to interview them. That's when I was first contacted by CARE, and we were working in conjunction with the ACLU. Both organizations, as civil rights organizations, realized that this was not only a violation of the Constitution and your rights to be left alone, but it also was causing a chilling effect on Muslims' freedom of expression, freedom of association. We had leadership from the masajid in town that were coming to us telling us that people are paranoid inside the masjid, that they don't know whether they can trust the other brother in the masjid is praying next to them, because there was all this hysteria because of this voluntary interview program. So we started the program shortly after 9/11, and we still continue it today. Anyone who is approached as part of this voluntary interview program, this outreach program, CARE will represent, and we will represent you free of charge. Okay, that's what we do, and we've done hundreds of these cases. but we need your help. Okay? So what that means is that if you're approached by someone who comes to the door, and this is the way they do it, they don't call you and make an appointment. They show up at home. Sometimes they show up at your job, and they'll say, hey, we got some questions we'd like to ask you. You know, you've done nothing wrong. Don't worry about it, but we just want to clear up a few things. We want to ask you some questions. And inevitably what happens is that these are just voluntary interviews that our community is participating in that we don't need to be doing. Because what's happening is we're creating lists, right? So they sit down and they talk to you and say, well, who else goes to the masjid with you, right? What do you think about this particular hadith? All sorts of constitutionally prohibited questions they're not supposed to be asking, but they do because you're voluntarily doing it, right? What that means is everyone you mentioned in that interview, guess what? They get a knock on the door also. And that's the way this program just keeps generating and generating and generating. People end up on the list of these voluntary interview programs. You can end up on the secondary Quad S list at the airports. I don't know how many people are on this list, but right now CARE is suing the United States government, Department of Justice, for this practice of what we believe is an unconstitutional list, which requires secondary screening of people at the airports. For those of you that this hadn't happened to, what it looks like is you try to log on to get your boarding pass, right? You can't get it. You got to go to the airport early and get a paper copy. You'll see when you get there that there's 4 S's on there, which is an enhanced security screening. CARE has uncovered, there was a leak that was disseminated on the internet that was then given to CARE. And we're right in the middle of this lawsuit against the government for this enhanced screening list. They call it the watch list. And we found that there were over 1.5 million names on this list. Okay? This is in America, right? You would expect those names to look like what? John Smith, Billy Bob, John Floyd, Billy White. No. 1.5 million names plus. I think it's 1.8. Is it 1.5? I think it's 1.8. 99% of those names are Muslim names. Most of those people, if not, I'd be willing to tell you it's at least 99% of those names are people who've done nothing wrong, but had just been placed on this list because someone has entered them into a database. And so we are right in the middle of this litigation right now. And so that's why it's so important that we don't help them build these lists, right? We've done nothing wrong. We've got nothing to hide. But at the same point, we need to be able to exercise our rights. And I know there's probably some people here embarrassed to say, well, I'll just tell you, I was on this list once. I was on this list because of the work we do at CARE. We had an FBI agent that thought it was funny to put me and the ACLU lawyer on this list until we figured out what was going on. I was getting pulled off planes. I was getting secondary searches. And we ended up taking that to the FBI special agent in charge, and we raised the stink about it, and eventually we had that particular agent removed. So there's something that we can do as long as we work together, right? So if you're contacted by the FBI, if they come to the door and they want to come in, we have a campaign that we've been running nationwide. You'll probably see it, it's cute. It says, "No chai for the FBI," okay? And you kind of know why, right? Because they are trained and they understand the hospitable nature of the Muslim community and in the Muslim world in general, right? And so they come to the door expecting for you to allow them in. And they also know that the community is likely to offer them tea and biscuits. Next thing you know, you've been sitting there with for an hour and a half, having tea with an FBI agent who's asking you questions and won't stop. Okay? So no chai for the FBI. The better way of handling that is to handle it like every other American in this country who understands their rights. Okay? You go to the door, they identify themselves, and you politely tell them, what's this about? And they're going to say, well, we just have some questions to ask you. Don't be afraid. Don't be timid. And you simply tell them, I've done nothing wrong. I've got nothing to hide, but I'm not going to talk to you without a lawyer being present. It's simple. Done nothing wrong. I'm not going to, and we add those first two parts of the statement, so because we know that our community wants to say that they got nothing to hide, and they've done nothing wrong. So you're completely free to tell them, look, I'm willing to cooperate with you. I've done nothing wrong. I've got nothing to hide, but I'm not going to talk to you without my lawyer being present. Okay? You don't have to have a lawyer yet to exercise this right, but it's your right to exercise. Supreme Court has said that if you don't exercise it, you don't have it. So it's important you be empowered with this language. These are magic words, right? You say that I'm not going to talk to you without a lawyer being present, and they have to stop asking you questions. It's very simple. You talk to a lawyer, before they leave, you get their name, their card, and you tell them that you'll have your lawyer call them back and set up an appointment to talk, and then we'll handle the rest. Okay, so if you're contacted by law enforcement as part of this voluntary interview program, it's very important. You exercise your rights. I've done nothing wrong. I've got nothing to hide. I'm not going to talk to you without a lawyer being present. We encourage people in the community not to allow them in the house. You're not being rude, okay? It's not rude. They have a job to do, and we also have a role to play in protecting our community. Don't let them in the house. Step outside, ask for their identification, and tell them you want to have a lawyer before you talk to them. It's simple. Everyone else in this country does it, and we should too, okay? At that point, you can call CARE, and we can figure out how we're going to respond to it. What's unfortunate, and we see this time and time and time again, is that if you play along with this voluntarily, and this is no insult to the FBI. They have a very important job to do. Their job is also to serve us and protect us, right? And to investigate crime. And we should be able to call them when we need them, but they should not be intruding into our privacy and harassing our community because of our religious beliefs or because of our country of origin, period. So don't let them in the house. No chai for the FBI. Ask for the identification, contact CARE, and then we'll figure out what's going on and go from there. What's very important is that this only really applies to the voluntary interviews. If police, FBI, if anyone shows up to your home with a warrant, okay, so there's two kinds of warrants. There's one's a search warrant and another is an arrest warrant. If someone shows up with a warrant, that means that a judge has been convinced that there is probable cause to exist, that either someone needs to be arrested or that a place needs to be searched. And if law enforcement shows up with one of these things, you need to let them do their job. That's a court order, and if you resist, again, you could be arrested for that, for interfering with the law enforcement. So that's the exception to what I said earlier. If they have a search warrant or if they have an arrest warrant. If they do, you need to comply. But guess what? You still don't need to talk to them. And in fact, our advice to everyone is that if there's a search warrant or an arrest warrant, that means that there is probable cause to exist that a crime has been committed, and that even heightens our scrutiny, okay? And so you should be on alert, and that's when you really need to have a lawyer, and you need to assert your rights to silence and to not talk to them without a lawyer being present. You have a question, bro? We get that. Yes. We get that question a lot, right? Because there have been situations where we have people who are imposters who are acting like they're law enforcement, right? There's all you can do at that point is you have to believe. If someone is coming to you and identifying themselves as law enforcement, if they have identification, if they're in a uniform, you have to err on the side of caution. I mean, because if you resist police in any way, it's a big problem. And so if you believe it's law enforcement, you need to give them respect, allow them to do their job, and not talk to them without having a lawyer being present. I know it's a difficult situation, but it does happen occasionally, but it's fairly rare, right, Chief? Yeah, yeah.
But you can verify if the police officer, the active police officer or not, but you all carry your IDs with us. You still it down, you can call the dispatch and they can get that.
You can call 911, yes. And so, sisters, you heard that. The question was, what do we do if it's an imposter, or we think it may be an imposter? And the reality is you can verify this. You can ask for their ID, and if you're not satisfied at that point, you need to tell them what you're doing. And you can say, listen, I'm scared that this may, that I'm worried that this may not be a legitimate, identification, or you may not be a legitimate officer. I'm going to call 911 right now and get them on, and 911 will tell you most likely there's an officer at your door. Okay, but you do need to be careful. As far as moving along to, if you are arrested, of course, you should also assert your rights to remain silent. You're in the highest level of danger at that point. And then again, don't try to talk your way out of it. Most people don't realize if you're contacted by a federal law enforcement agent, it is a felony to make a false statement to a federal law enforcement agent, right? And so if the FBI or Homeland Security or ICE or IRS, any of these agencies who are federal agents, if they come to the door, the very safest thing to do is to simply tell them, I'm glad to talk to you, but I'm not going to talk to you without a lawyer being present, because you have nothing to lose in that situation, right? On the other hand, if you make a false statement, and I know no one's going to lie to the police intentionally, but a lot of times people try to make themselves look better, or they try to explain things. And if that happens, you can be charged with a felony offense of making a false statement to a law enforcement agent. So it's always safer to just, exert your rights to remain silent and request a lawyer. Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes. And what's this one? Okay. So we get a lot of calls also about people who are traveling. So it's important to know that when you're leaving the country, all your constitutional rights are intact, okay? There's a strange fiction that once you leave the country and come back, your constitutional rights actually don't attach until you've been admitted back into the country. So when you're leaving, we typically don't have any problems. People understand you don't have to let anyone, give anyone the passcode to your phone. You don't have to answer any questions. When we get a lot of problems when people are coming back into the country because they don't understand their rights, and law enforcement will tell them, and it's true, that you have no constitutional rights to an attorney until you're actually admitted to the country. You don't have the right to have an attorney there when you're questioned on entry to the country. That's fine, and that's true, but you also do not have to answer any questions until you have an attorney being present. And so if you're steadfast and you say, look, I understand that, but I'm not going to talk to you, answer any of your questions other than those necessary to prove that I'm a U.S. citizen, then you'll have to be admitted to the country if you're a citizen. If you are a resident alien, green card holder, your rights are slightly diminished. They can detain you for questioning, delay your entry into the country. And if you're a visitor, it could result in you being turned around. But it's our advice to all people traveling into the country that they should not be answering questions until they have an attorney present. If you are patted down or when you're traveling to the airport, please know that TSA has a right, when you're putting your bags on the conveyor belt, they have a right to search you for the safety of the aircraft and for the other passengers. So you can be patted down, you can be searched. For our sisters, we advise that you have every right, and that's in those situations, to be asked to go to a private room and to have all those procedures done by a female agent. And so just know that that is something that there's policy for that, and they're supposed to comply with that if you ask for that. I'm sorry, this is really small. Do you think there are any? Okay. Just kind of wrapping this up, and then we can, if we have a minute or two. The bottom line is that CARE is here for you. You know, what we've been doing for the last 20 plus years is trying to educate the Muslim community about their civil rights, because it's important for our community to be empowered, that we know what our rights are and we know how to exercise them. And so don't be ashamed of exercising your rights. We had a meeting one day with a special agent in charge with the FBI, and we were going through this with them. And we were kind of having a debate, and the special agent in charge of the FBI said, you know, you're right. If they came to my door and they wanted to ask my wife questions, I would tell her not to talk to them without a lawyer being present, right? Law enforcement, police officers are regularly instructed. If something happens where someone is shot or killed, or there's complaints on the scene, they also should consider invoking their own rights before they have, until they have counsel present. So this is something we should all be proud of and we should all understand. And so if you take nothing else away from this, just remember, I'm glad to talk to you, but I'm not going to talk to you without my lawyer being present. This will work in almost any situation that you're having when you have an encounter with law enforcement. I'll mention the other programs.
So thank you so much, John. Jazakumullah khair. Very quickly, we only have a minute and a half. CARE, this is not the only program that we offer. We have 5 Know Your Rights training, so we go more in depth on Know Your Rights while traveling. We have a Know Your Rights as a student, which we'll be kicking that back up in August, inshallah, as everyone goes back to school, which I'm sure a lot of parents are counting down the days. We also have a Know Your Rights in the workplace, which I think, we saw a serious downtick in civil rights violations reported with law enforcement, but we saw an uptick with civil rights violations reported at work and at school. So these are really, really important policies that everyone should be aware of. And on Wednesday of next week, we're actually going to do a virtual training regarding the recent Supreme Court case for religious accommodation. So inshallah, I hope that everyone will be here or online. You can go to CARE Texas Houston on our Facebook page to follow that. If there's any part of tonight's presentation you'd like to go over again, we were streamed live on Masjid Sabreen Brand Lane Islamic Center. We also, I'm going to leave this open on my computer. I know it's really, really small, so I apologize. We have a QR code. If you have a question that we weren't able to get to tonight, you can come and scan this QR code on your smartphone. Just lift the camera up, and it will take you to a link, which will allow you to fill out a form, and we will be happy to answer that for you. Follow CARE Houston on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. If you're interested in what our work and what we do, you can go to carehouston.com. If you need my contact information or you'd like to contact CARE regarding any legal case, come get my number from me after Salah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.